Today, on the premiere episode of Watch Out Show, we'll look at the Watcher, a stalker who was active in 2017. In June 2014, Maria Broaddus, her husband, Derek, and their 3 young children were getting ready to move into their new home, 657 Boulevard, in Westfield, New Jersey. The 6-bedroom, $1.3 million house was their dream home, located only a few blocks from Maria's childhood home in what was then the 30th safest town in America, according to the website Neighborhood Scout. A mere 3 days after closing the sale, before the Broaddus family had even moved in, a letter arrived at their new mailbox. The new owner was written by hand on the envelope in thick, clunky letters. The typed letter began, "Dearest new neighbor, at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." The letter, however, was anything but welcoming. It went on, "How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time." The letter also mentioned specifics about the Broaddus family. "You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me." In a cursive font, the author typed the signature "The Watcher." After receiving the letter, the Broaddus family reached out to the couple that had sold them the house, John and Andrea Woods. The previous owners said they have never received any letter like that in 23 years of living in the house, except once, a few days before they moved out. While they thought the note they received was odd, they threw it out without much concern. Still, the Woods family went with the Broaddus family to the police to report the letters. The police instructed the couples to not tell anyone about the intimidating mail, including their neighbors, who were all deemed suspects. 2 weeks later, with the Broaddus family still not moved in, a second letter arrived. Disturbingly, this message contained more details about the new owners, including their name, though misspelled, and their children's birth order and nicknames. The author also referenced seeing their daughter painting on an easel in an enclosed porch space, asking, "Is she the artist in the family?" Other parts read, "It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic? Or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better." After receiving this letter, Maria and Derek stopped bringing their children to the house and put a hold on their plans to move in. Several weeks later, a third letter arrived. "Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you." However, by the end of the year, the investigation into who the Watcher was had stalled. There was no digital trail, no fingerprints, and no way to place someone at the scene of a crime. Meanwhile, the stress was taking a mental toll on the Broaddus family. Derek said he was experiencing depression. Maria's therapist said she was suffering from PTSD. And both were afflicted with levels of paranoia that made much of their daily life seem threatening. Only 6 months after the letters arrived, they decided to sell the house. Due to rumors about the property, however, buyers were hesitant. The Broadus family sued the Woodses for failing to disclose the threatening letter they'd received. A local reporter found the complaint, which included excerpts from the letters. His small story became a viral sensation, causing a media circus to swirl around the house. Now totally unable to find a buyer, the Broadus family considered selling the house to a developer who could tear it down and split the property into 2 homes. The 2 plots, however, would each be less than 3 feet too small for the mandated size of the neighborhood. The Broadus family appealed the rule to the Neighborhood Planning Board, who unanimously rejected the proposal. Maria was understandably upset, saying, "This is my town, I grew up here. I came back, I chose to raise my kids here. You know what we've been through. You had the ability 2.5 years into a nightmare to make it a little better. And you have decided that this house is more important than we are." It should be noted that in 2018, the Westfield Planning Board approved splitting up a different lot around the corner from 657 Boulevard. One that required a larger exception than the Broadus family requested. That Christmas, some families who had vocally protested the Broadus' plan received threatening hand-delivered letters, signed "Friends of the Broadus Family." More on these later. In spring of 2016, just short of 2 years after the first letter arrived, the Broadus family found someone to rent the home. The family had 2 large dogs, fully grown children, and a clause in the lease that let them out if there was another letter. Within 2 weeks, another letter arrived, to the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria. 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault, and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the Boulevard followed my orders to AT. They carried out their mission, and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail the Watcher. Despite the letter, the renters agreed to stay after more cameras were installed around the house. Now up to current day, it's time to look at suspects for who the Watcher could be. Our first suspect is a man I'm calling the Gamer. Around 11 p.m. one night, while 2 detectives from Westfield Police were surveilling 657 Boulevard, a car suspiciously stopped outside the house. The car was traced to a young woman from a town close by. The home of her boyfriend was on the same block as 657 Boulevard. The woman told investigators that her boyfriend was into some really dark video games, including possibly one where he played as a character called the Watcher. According to an investigator's memory, the Gamer agreed to be questioned by police, but he never showed up for his interviews. Detectives didn't have enough evidence to force him to come, so he was never questioned. The second suspect is another neighbor, Michael Langford. Derek began to suspect Langford after attending a neighborhood barbecue shortly after receiving the first letter. Langford lived in the house next door, which belonged to his 90-year-old mother. Several of her adult children, all in their 60s, lived with her. And the family was seen as strange but harmless. The Langfords had lived in the house since the 60s, which was when the Watcher claimed his father watched the house. Michael's father had died about 12 years before the first letter arrived, which could have been why the Watcher claimed to have done the job of watching for the better part of 2 decades. Langford was also known to spook new neighbors with his odd behavior, like walking through their yards and peeking through windows. Due to the positioning of the houses, Langford would have had a perfect view of the easel they had set on the porch for their daughter that the second letter referenced. Police questioned Michael Langford after the first letter, but he denied knowing anything and there was little evidence to connect him. Because the police's interview was before the second letter, some believed it would have been especially reckless for Langford to continue sending letters. As well, those who knew him largely vouched for Langford, thinking him incapable of writing the letters. The Broadus family, working with the police, sent a letter to the Langfords, telling them they were planning on demolishing the house in hopes of drawing the Watcher to right again. There was no response. Casting doubt on Langford is a test later performed on one of the envelopes, which found DNA that belonged to a woman. Thinking Michael's sister, Abby, may be the Watcher, an investigator compared the DNA to that from a water bottle used by Abby. No match. Shortly after this DNA test, and without explanation, prosecutors informed Derek and Maria that they had ruled out any of the Langfords as suspects, which brings us to our third suspect. The Broadus family themselves. Locals found it suspicious that the Broadus family was over the years able to move from a $315,000 home to a $770,000 home to a $1.3 million home with refinanced mortgages. Some accused the family of getting in over their heads with the home and turning to a desperate ploy to get out of it. Some neighbors wondered why the Broadus family kept renovating the house after they decided they wouldn't move in. When major movie studios began courting the family for the rights to their story, a big media deal could have been more motivation for concocting the Watcher. What's more, I mentioned that some local families received anonymous threatening letters after the Planning Commission rejected the Broadus' proposal to split the lot. Those letters turned out to be written by Derek. Derek claims those letters were the only anonymous letters he's ever sent, and were the result of years of frustration at his family's plight and the neighborhood's seeming ambivalence. As well, the psychological trauma from the letters alone makes the Broadus family being the Watcher seem thin. Casting more doubt on the theory that the Broadus family is the Watcher, a later investigation found that another family on the Boulevard had also received a note from the Watcher around the time the Broaduses received their first. Just like the previous owners, the Woods family, that family had lived in the house for years without a problem and threw the letter away. But if the Broadus family was trying to get out of their home or make a movie deal, why send a letter to another house as well? What makes the case of the Watcher so fascinating is the limited number of potential suspects, coupled with the complete lack of evidence that has stymied investigators' ability to make progress. Perhaps some future note will provide the key clue to identifying the person responsible. But until then, the case remains unsolved.